So in our last study, we looked at the first half of the book of Daniel and all of the references to metals and how they spoke of values. Now, as we get to the second half of the book, we've learned that there's a change in the pattern. There's not references to metals that run through the second half of the book, but instead there's something in its place, and that is a reference to writings and to books. We already talked about how in chapter 6 there's a huge emphasis on the law of the Medes and Persians, which doesn't change, versus the law of Moses, the law of God, and how the men in the Medo-Persian government try to destroy Daniel through his law, through his religion, or rather the law of Moses. And so now we turn into chapter 7, and you can see in chapter 7 that we get a new kind of emphasis. We have an emphasis on books. The books were opened. Now, what are these books referring to? Well, this is a passage talking about the Ancient of Days. Just a reminder, chapter 7 is where you have the four beasts that war among themselves, and eventually there's a judge, the Ancient of Days, who sits in his seat, and he has come clearly to judge the beasts. Now, when he judges them, he opens the books, and of course, books being opened is very different from what beasts can do, right? Beasts cannot read, where the four animals cannot read, but the Ancient of Days can read. He has wisdom, he has white long hair, and he's going to judge the four beasts, all right? And in the midst of that, there's the little horn, one of the kings that comes out of these beasts, and what all this refers to we can talk about later when we get to that chapter, but for now, just note the emphasis on, again, another reference to writing here. In the little horn will try to change, he shall think to change the times and the law. So whereas in the previous chapter, the law of the Medes and Persians cannot be changed, supposedly, and then here you have a king who is deliberately going to try and change the times and the law. But of course, this law now is something deeper than just any old human law, as we'll see when we get to the chapter. I think the writer Daniel means something more than that, or at least the revelation, that's coming to him is meaning much more than that. Then in chapter 8, you get the vision of two beasts, not four beasts. And in this one, again, you have a reference to the little horn, and this time the little horn will throw truth to the ground. Remember, these are writings of law and writings of truth. So he will try to throw truth to the ground. And in what way will he do it? Well, he'll do it by removing the regular burnt offering, which was commanded by in the law of Moses. And so he's directly challenging that law and the authority of that law, as well as the place of the sanctuary and so on. So he will throw truth to the ground. And then in chapter 9, Daniel opened books. He perceived in the books, and this is referring to specifically to Jeremiah the prophet, and how Jeremiah said that the judgment that would fall on Israel would be about 70 years, and it would be 70 years. And since we're in the first year of Darius, we're now coming to the end of those 70 years, and Daniel knows this, and so he has Jeremiah the prophet open, and he's looking at the prophecies, and he sees the specific reference to the 70 years, and he's trying to understand in anticipation that God is going to now reverse what he's done to Israel, or begin to reverse it. And so he turns to God and he prays. And the rest of the chapter is him praying to God, and then eventually the angel Gabriel is sent to respond to Daniel's prayer and to interpret what Jeremiah meant in those books. So there's another story again about books and writings of law and truth. And then here in chapter 10 through 12, the final vision, which takes up chapters 10 to 12. What is this vision about? This man who's above the river, this extraordinary image of an angelic type, or divine, possibly, a person who is going to interpret what is inscribed in the book of truth. And so there's another now interpretation of books from God, pairing chapter 9 with the vision in chapter 9 with or rather the events that unfold in chapter 9 with the vision in chapters 10 to 12. Okay, so there you have it. You have the 5 last stories of the book, the second half of the book, all related to visions of that have to do with law, or rather stories that have to do with writings of law and truth. Now, what is the relationship between law and truth? How do those things hold together? How are they related? Well, a law, if we just start with a law, what exactly is a law or law? A good place, by the way, to pause this reading guide and think for yourself for a moment. What is a law? Well, a law is an encoded value, right? We have a value, the sacredness of human life, the sanctity of human life, and we encode it in laws. You can't steal, you can't kill, and things like this, okay? So it's an encoded value, and the key is it's encoded, it's inscribed, it's encoded, and therefore it has an authority and is then enforced by the government. That's what we mean by law. And of course, truth, well, truth is like an encoded law in that they're both fixed. You see, if something were to become other than the truth, right? If something is other than the truth, then by definition it's false. It's falsehood. It's the opposite, right? If the truth changes, that means the truth is no longer true. So the truth is something which is fixed. The truth is fixed reality. Okay? And if this is fixed reality and the law is fixed value. Okay? So, why might that be important? Because in the first half of the book, where we talked about metals, the metals were on a scale. They were values, okay? But the values were on a scale. Some metals are more valuable than others in terms of their aesthetics. Some are more valuable in terms of their strength. There's a sort of scale, and it was a nice way to critique Babylon, to use these various kinds of values in the metals. When you get to the second half of the book and you're talking about the city of Jerusalem is now the new focus, is the primary focus of many of the stories in the second half of the book, and how God's plans for that city. And now the visions are measured, so to speak, off of something like a yardstick, a fixed value, right? A yardstick is a yard, it's a length, but it's a fixed length. Okay? And so 2 different parts of the book with 2 different patterns of symbols, the writings of law and truth in the second half, the metals in the first half, and then how these will play into the message of each of the stories. We'll get to that as we treat each of the stories, okay? That brings us then to our question for you. Big question. It's a hard question, but it's the absolute most important question when you're trying to study in any part of the Bible. What is the unique can't write here, unique message of the book? What is the unique message? I mean, Daniel has stories about faith, sure, about salvation and so on. Well, there are other parts of the Bible like that. But what does Daniel offer that's unique to his book, and that ties, first of all, the 2 halves of the book together, and then also each of the parts of the book, the 10 stories in the book? what threads them all together? Like, what is the main message that Daniel is delivering to Babylon and to Israel? And of course, this is the message of God being delivered through Daniel. Can you boil it down to one simple sentence? All right. Now, in reality, this is what's going to happen. You're going to offer a kind of an idea, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to offer an idea of what I think the message of the book is. And then as we go along through the book, we'll be able to kind of test our idea of what the book is ultimately about. Is that borne out by the facts of the book, by the various stories of the book? And then in what ways is this message still uniquely relevant for us? Okay, so that's your next task. Again, it's kind of preliminary because you have to go through the whole book to get to this, but this is just kind of where we stand now, what do we think the message of the book is? So best wishes, and we'll see you next time.